Josephine Marsh curtsied to a countess who would not give her a chair. 40 guests sat in the long gold room at Ashdown. She was left standing at the edge of it, plain and paid and quiet, a companion in a grey travelling dress. She did not flush. She did not leave. She only folded her gloved hands over the little reticule she carried and waited to be forgotten. Then the countess spoke, so the whole room could hear. "In England, my dear," said Lady Ophelia, Countess of Ashdown, to 40 seated guests, "we are born to our place. One does not purchase it with American coin she plainly hasn't got." The room laughed, all 40 of them, and here is the thing they could not see. That little reticule the companion never set down. Inside it, folded once, a New York bank draft. The whole laughing house had already, without knowing it, signed its own name to that paper. Every stone, every acre. They just didn't know it yet. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have looked closer, this story is for you. Before we go on, do something for me. Tap subscribe so this channel can keep telling stories like this one. And in the comments, tell me the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Now, let's begin properly, because you have to understand who she was before you can understand what she did. Josephine Calloway grew up between a railway yard in Albany and a drawing room on Fifth Avenue. That is not a common childhood. Most people belong to one world or the other. She belonged to both, and to neither, and she never quite forgot it. Her father built the Calloway and Western Railroad out of nothing. He started with a length of track and a bad horse and a great deal of stubbornness. By the time Josephine was born, he owned more miles of iron than most men could ride in a week. He was rich in the way that frightens people, rich enough to buy a senator, rich enough to buy silence. But he had married a laundress. He married her before the money came. Her name was Mary. She had red hands from the washtubs and a soft, level way of looking at a man that made him tell the truth. Old Calloway married her in a bare little church with no one watching, and when the money came, and it came like a flood, he never once pretended she was anything other than what she was. When the fine New York wives asked, in their careful voices, where he had found his charming wife, he told them. A laundry. He found her in a laundry. And he watched their faces, and he smiled. Mary died when Josephine was 14. But she left the girl 2 things. The first was a plain gold wedding band, worn thin, worth almost nothing. The second was harder to name. Call it a good ear. Mary could hear the false note in a kind voice. She taught her daughter to hear it too. So Josephine grew up with a fortune under her and a laundress's ear in her head. She could read a balance sheet by the time she was 16. She read the financial columns the way other girls read novels, and she understood them, which was rarer. Her father took her into the counting rooms and the switching yards and let her watch how money was truly made, which is to say, slowly and by men who did not sleep well. And then her father died and left her all of it. The whole railroad, the trust in New York that held it, everything. At 24, Josephine Calloway was one of the richest unmarried women in America. You would think that would be a happy thing. It was not, because after that, every man who came to her came with a ledger behind his eyes. She could see it. Her mother had taught her to see it. They spoke of her hair and they meant her fortune. They admired her wit and they were counting her holdings. There was one she almost believed. A young man from a good New York family, all charm and warm attention, and for a season she let herself hope. She thought, perhaps this one sees me. Then a servant found his letters. He had been writing to a friend. In the letters he priced her. He weighed the Calloway trust against another heiress's coal money, the way a man weighs 2 horses at a fair. He wrote that Josephine was plain but serviceable, and the railroad more than makes up for the face. He wrote about how soon he might get control of the trust once they were married. She read every word. She did not weep where anyone could see. She was her mother's daughter. But something in her went very quiet and very cold, and stayed that way. So she made a decision that her aunt thought was madness. Her aunt was Harriet Calloway, 61, her father's widowed sister, sharp as a tack and loyal as a hound. Harriet had a small independent income and a great deal of opinion, and Josephine went to her and said, "I want to go to England for the season, but not as myself, not as the heiress. I will go as your companion. Plain Miss Marsh, a poor young woman you pay to fetch your shawl and read to you at night. And I will watch. I want to see, just once, who is kind to a woman worth nothing." Harriet argued. Of course she argued, but she loved the girl, and she understood the wound, and in the end she agreed. She would go as the paying guest. Josephine would go as the servant. And they would see. They took rooms for the season at Ashdown Hall. Now you should see Ashdown as she first saw it, because it matters. Somerset in early summer. A long white road through green country, near a village called Hartley Combe, and then the house, rising up behind a screen of old lime trees, grey stone gone gold in the afternoon light. It was beautiful. It truly was. 300 years of it, towers and long windows, and a great sweep of lawn. But Josephine had a good eye, and as the carriage came up the drive, she saw the other thing. The paint peeling on the window frames, a whole wing with the shutters closed and blind, weeds in the gravel, a fountain gone dry and green, the stables half empty. The house was beautiful, and the house was quietly, desperately rotting. She said nothing. She was learning to say nothing. The Ravensworths owned Ashdown, and had for 300 years, and were very proud of both facts. There was Lady Ophelia, the Countess, 58, a widow, the true power in the place. There was the heir, Viscount Aubrey, 33, handsome in a cold, expensive way, with a habit of looking just past whoever he spoke to. There was a younger son, off somewhere in the army. And there was the great and pressing family question, which everyone knew and no one said aloud. They needed money. Badly, Michaelmas was coming. That is the 29th of September, an old quarter day when the great debts of the year fall due. And the Ravensworths owed. How much, Josephine did not yet know. But she could read a closed wing and a dry fountain, and she could read the tightness around the Countess's mouth when the talk turned to the estate. They took Aunt Harriet in as a paying guest for the season, good American money, and they were not in a position to refuse good money, though Lady Ophelia managed to accept it as though it faintly soiled her fingers. And Harriet's companion, the plain grey Miss Marsh, they treated the way you treat a piece of furniture that has come with a lodger. They did not see her. They did not intend to see her. She was there to carry things, which was exactly what Josephine wanted. You learn a great deal about people when they think you cannot hear. The first morning set the pattern. Breakfast at Ashdown was a slow, cold affair in a room too big for it. Josephine sat where a companion sits, at the far low end of the table, and she was past the cooling toast and the dregs of the pot, and no one spoke to her, and she watched. Aunt Harriet had the newspapers. She liked the city pages, the financial ones, a taste she and her niece shared. And over her coffee that morning Harriet murmured, half to herself, the sort of thing that fills a silence. "They say Barrington's Bank has been selling off the county's bad paper," she said. "All the old mortgages the great families can't pay. Selling them cheap to the Americans, apparently, imagine that." Nobody at the head of the table so much as looked up. It was just weather, just the dull money talk of a dull American widow. Josephine turned a page of her own paper. She said nothing. She did not change her face at all. But she had heard it. Barrington's Bank. the county's bad paper, sold cheap to the Americans. And she filed it away, the way her father had taught her, quiet and exact, the way you note a loose rail before a train comes. You should remember that too. It felt like nothing. It was not nothing. Now the sneers began, and I want you to watch them build. Because they build. The first was the chair. It was a small evening gathering, a handful of neighbours come to look over the Americans. The company moved into the drawing room, and there were chairs enough for the guests, and Lady Ophelia arranged the seating with her eye, the way a general arranges troops. Aunt Harriet was given a chair, a poor one, but a chair. And there was one left, and Josephine stood near it, plainly tired, the long day of travel and fetching still on her. Lady Ophelia looked at the last chair. Then she looked at Josephine. And then she called a young neighbour girl to come and sit in it, and turned away and left the companion standing. It was nothing you could name. That was the art of it. No one had been rude exactly. A companion stands. Everyone knew a companion stands. Josephine stood, straight and quiet, for the length of that long evening, and she watched Lady Ophelia not look at her, and she understood that the not looking was on purpose. It was a message. You are furniture. Furniture does not sit. She kept her face still. But under her glove, on a ribbon around her wrist, she wore her mother's thin gold ring, and once, only once, she pressed it against her palm. The second sneer was the table. There came a proper dinner, 20 at the board, and the question of where the companion would sit. In a great house there is an old cruelty built right into the furniture. The salt cellar sits in the middle of the table. Above the salt, near the host, sit the honoured. Below the salt sit the lesser folk. And below even that, at the very foot, with the governess and the poor relations, sits whoever the house has decided does not signify. That is where they seated Josephine. Below the salt, beside the children's governess, a gentle, frightened woman who had learned long ago to make herself small. And from the head of the table, all through the meal, the talk flowed over her head as though she were not there. They discussed the estate. They discussed money, delicately, in the code the well-bred use, but Josephine spoke that code fluently, and she heard it all. They spoke of the need to marry Aubrey well, and soon, and richly. They spoke of a certain Lady Cressida Marlowe, a coal heiress, most suitable, expected any day. They spoke of their ruin, in short, right over the head of the one woman in England who could have bought and sold every one of them without noticing the cost. She ate her cooling soup with the governess and said not one word. The third sneer had a face, and the face was Lady Cressida Marlowe's. Cressida arrived a few days later and was everything the house had hoped for. 24, golden-gowned in the height of London fashion, the daughter of a coal fortune, exactly the kind of money the Ravensworths meant to marry. Aubrey warmed to her the way a cold man warms to a bank. Lady Ophelia purred. What no one at Ashdown knew, and what Josephine would only learn later, was that the Marlowe coal money was gone. Spent, the mines failing, the fortune a beautiful painted shell, and Cressida sent out into the season to marry a great title before the emptiness showed. She was, in her way, as much a fraud as Josephine. But her fraud ran the other direction. She was a pauper dressed as an heiress. Josephine was an heiress dressed as a pauper. And they were about to stand in the same room. There was a receiving line one afternoon, a small county affair, the family greeting arriving guests. And Josephine, in her plain grey, stood a little back, near Aunt Harriet. As Cressida came down the line, gracious to the ladies, charming to the gentlemen, she came to Josephine. And she stopped, and she looked at the grey dress, and the plain face, and the little worn reticule, and she understood in one glance that this was no one. A companion. A servant with airs. She did not speak. She did not nod. She simply let her eyes pass over Josephine as though over an empty space, and moved on to the next real person, and the small, deliberate cut of it, in front of everyone, was perfect and complete. Josephine watched her go, and Josephine, who could read a balance sheet in the dark, looked at that gown and that fashionable everything and thought, quietly, without knowing yet how right she was, that one is spending money she is very afraid she doesn't have. The fourth sneer came from Aubrey, and it was the one that named the game. There was a morning in the small parlour. The family idle, the papers about, and Josephine sat in her corner with the city pages, reading the market reports as easily as breathing, because she had forgotten herself for a moment, because it was the one pleasure the disguise allowed her. Viscount Aubrey noticed. He found it funny. "Look here," he said to the room, loud enough to gather them. "The companion reads the money pages. He said it the way you'd say a dog was reading Latin. Do you follow the markets, Miss Marsh, watching your investments?" And he laughed, and the others laughed with him, because the joke was that she had nothing, would never have anything, would never in her life hold a single pound she had not been paid for fetching a shawl. "A companion who reads the money pages," he said, wiping his eye, as though she'd ever hold a pound of her own. Josephine looked up. She met his eyes for one steady moment, and she did the hardest thing, which was nothing. She lowered her gaze and turned her page and let them laugh, and she did not tell them that she had that very morning read a report on the Western railroads, and that she owned the largest of them, and that the dividend they had just laughed about was in a small way hers. She let them laugh. She was building something, though she did not fully know it yet, and the thing she was building needed patience more than it needed pride. And through all of this, watch the little things, because the little things were the truth, hidden in plain sight. The reticule, for one, she never set it down. A small grey bag on a cord, the kind a poor woman carries because it holds everything she owns. The family, when they thought of it at all, thought it was that, the pathetic little bag of a woman with nothing. She kept it close because she had nothing else, poor thing. That is what they thought. But you know better. You saw what was folded inside it, and the finance for another. Twice now she had let it slip, the fluency, the ease with the money pages, the way she followed the markets like a native speaker. They laughed at it. They should have wondered at it. A penniless companion does not read a bond report the way a banker's daughter does. But they did not wonder. Contempt does not wonder. Contempt is too pleased with itself to ask a single useful question. And one more thing, the smallest of all. There was a man in the lane. Josephine walked out most mornings, early, alone, along the lane below the house where the lime trees threw their shade. And more than once, in those early walks, she saw a man. A quiet, sober-dressed man, a man of business by the look of him, standing at the field gate and looking up at Ashdown Hall, looking at it the way a surveyor looks at a bridge, measuring it. His name was Ballard. He was the London agent of a New York trust, the Hudson Meridian Trust, and he was there on business that concerned that great grey house far more than the house could imagine. He and Josephine knew one another, but when they passed in the lane, they did not speak, and they did not nod. She looked through him as though he were a stranger, and he touched his hat to no one and looked back up at the house. Only once, when they had passed and no one could see, did the corner of her mouth move. Not a smile, just the ghost of one. And then it was gone. Now I have to tell you about Edmund, because Edmund is the reason any of this ends the way it does. Captain Edmund Ravensworth was the second son, 30 years old, home that summer from a long posting in the colonies, brown from the sun and quieter than his brother by a mile. Second sons in old families are a particular kind of poor. He would inherit nothing. The house, the title, the land, all of it went to Aubrey. Edmund had his army pay and his name and not 1 acre of ground, and he knew exactly what he was worth in the marriage market of his world, which was to say, nothing at all. A landless second son had nothing to offer any woman. He believed that the way you believe a thing you have been told your whole life. He came home into the middle of the season and found his mother and his brother deep in the business of catching an heiress, and he found, standing quietly at the edge of every room, a plain grey companion whom no one saw. He saw her. It started with a chair. Of course it started with a chair. There was an evening, company in the drawing-room again, and again the arithmetic of seats came up short, and again Josephine stood at the edge of it, expecting nothing, having learned to expect nothing. And Edmund Ravensworth got up out of his own chair, crossed the room, and offered it to her. Just like that. "Miss Marsh," he said. "Please." And he stood, and he waited, plain as day, until she sat. The room noticed. His mother noticed. There was a small frost in the air of it. A son of the house, giving up his seat to the paid companion, as though she were a lady. It was not done. Lady Ophelia's eyes went cool. Josephine sat, because to refuse would have made a scene, and she looked up at him, and for the first time in weeks somebody at Ashdown looked back at her as if she were a person. Not furniture, not a servant, a person worth the courtesy of a chair. She did not trust it. Understand that. Her whole reason for coming to England was to find out whether kindness like this even existed, and she had been so long among the cold that she half suspected a trick. She waited for the ledger to show behind his eyes. She listened, with her mother's ear, for the false note. There wasn't one. They fell into talk, over the days that followed, in the small, stolen ways such things happen in a great house. He walked her out to the orchard one afternoon, the old walled orchard behind the stables, where the apple trees stood in their long grass. And it was the one part of the estate that was not rotting, because things grow whether or not a family can pay its debts, and they walked among the trees and they talked. He talked to her as though her opinions were worth having. He asked her what she thought, and then he was quiet and listened to the answer, which is rarer in a man than you would like to believe. He told her about the colonies, the heat and the strangeness and the loneliness of it. She told him things too, careful things, half-true things, but her true self all the same, because a person cannot help but leak a little truth to someone who is actually listening. And here is the thing that mattered most. He believed she was poor. He believed she was a companion with nothing, no fortune, no family, no acre, and no expectation. And he courted her anyway. Not courted even, that is too formal for what it was. He simply began to love her, plainly and honestly, a landless man with nothing to offer falling for a penniless woman with less. It made no sense by any accounting his family kept. It made every sense in the world. His mother saw it and recoiled. Once, in a low, furious voice Josephine was not meant to hear, Lady Ophelia told him to stop making a fool of himself over the companion. There was a girl coming, a real girl with real money, and here was Edmund throwing courtesy at a servant. Edmund did not stop. Josephine walked back from the orchard that day, with her heart doing something it had not done in a long time, and she was frightened of it, because she had come to England precisely to test whether a man could love a woman worth nothing. And it seemed impossibly that she had found one, and she did not yet dare believe it. Then came the ball, and the ball was the worst of it. The Ashdown County Ball was the great event of the neighbourhood's summer, and the family spent money they did not have to put it on, because appearances were the last thing they owned outright. 40 guests and more, the long gold room lit and full, the county's best, and Lady Cressida gowned like a queen, and Aubrey attentive at her side, and the whole slow machinery of a marriage between an empty title and an empty fortune grinding quietly forward while everyone smiled. Josephine attended as what she was, the companion. She was there to be useful to Aunt Harriet and otherwise invisible in her plain grey among the silks. She kept to the edges. She kept the reticule on its cord, close, as always, and at the height of the evening, with the room full and the music paused, Lady Ophelia decided to be sure that everyone understood the order of things. It may have been Edmund's chair that did it, the way her son had begun to show open regard for the nobody in grey. It may have been that the Countess wanted the whole county to see, plainly, that this American servant was nothing, so that no foolish notion could take root. Whatever the reason, she chose her moment, and she chose it in front of everyone. There was some small matter of seating for the supper, and Lady Ophelia's voice rose, clear and carrying, pitched to reach the walls, so that 40 faces turned. Miss Marsh. A silence opened around the name. You will not sit with the company. You are Mrs. Calloway's paid companion, are you not? Then you will take your supper with the staff, where you belong. And then, when she had them all, when every eye in that gold room was on the plain grey woman standing alone, she delivered the line she had been sharpening for weeks, the line that would end her. She just didn't know it yet. In England, my dear, we are born to our place. One does not purchase it with American coin she plainly hasn't got. And the room laughed. 40 of them. The good county families, the silks and the jewels, Cressida's bright, cruel laugh in the middle of it, Aubrey's cold chuckle, all of them laughing at the penniless American in grey who had dared to be given a chair. Josephine stood in the centre of it, and she did not flush, she did not weep, she did not run. Something in her had gone past all of that, into a place very still and very clear. She stood straight, and she waited until the laughter had run its course, until the silence came back and every eye was still on her, waiting to see the servant crumble. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and perfectly level, and steadier than any voice in that room had a right to be. "Thank you for your hospitality, Lady Ophelia," she said. "It has been most instructive." And she inclined her head, a small correct bow, the courtesy of an equal and not the cringe of a servant, and she turned, and she walked out of the long gold room, with her back straight and her chin level, unhurried, while 40 people watched, and not one of them understood that they had just seen a queen leave a room full of people who thought they were her betters. Out in the passage, alone, in the cool dark beyond the light and the music, she stopped. She stood a moment, with her hand against the cold stone wall. And then she drew off her right glove, slowly, and there on the ribbon around her wrist was the thin, worn gold band. Her mother's ring. The laundress's ring, worth almost nothing, worth everything. She held it between her fingers, in the dark, in the quiet, and she thought of Mary, and the red hands, and the good ear, and the man who married a laundress and never once let anyone make her small. She did not cry. But she held the ring a long moment, and when she put her glove back on and walked to her own plain room, something had changed in her, quietly and for good. The wound had finished. What came after the wound was beginning. Aunt Harriet was waiting for her, and Aunt Harriet was on fire. Harriet had been in the room. Harriet had heard the whole thing, the guillotine line, the laughter, and Harriet Calloway was 61 years old and afraid of nothing, and she was ready to burn Ashdown Hall to the ground. "That is enough," she said, low and shaking, the moment the door closed. "That is enough, Josephine. I will not sit in that woman's house one more hour and let her call you a pauper. Do you know what I will do? I will walk into that ballroom this instant, and I will tell every soul in it exactly who you are. I will tell them what you are worth. I will watch that dreadful woman's face when she learns she has been seating the Calloway heiress below the salt with the governess. I will end it tonight." And she meant it. Her hand was already on the door. "No," Josephine said it quietly, but it stopped Harriet cold. "No, Aunt, not that. Not like that." She came and took the older woman's furious hands in her own and held them. "If you tell them, then I never get my answer. Then I never know if anyone in this whole cold country would have been kind to me for nothing. And I have my answer, Aunt. Do you understand? I have it. Someone was." Harriet looked at her and understood, and her fury broke into something gentler and more grieved. "The captain," she said. "The captain," Josephine agreed, softly, "who thinks I have nothing, and loves me anyway." She let go of Harriet's hands. "Don't take that from me. It's the only true thing I've found in England. Let it stand." Harriet, who had come near to ending the whole disguise out of pure love, out of pure rage on the girl's behalf, sat down heavily and put her face in her hands and let it stand. But it was a near thing. You should know how near. That was the night everything turned. Because late that same night, when the great house was dark and the ball long over and the guests gone home, there was a quiet knock at the door of Aunt Harriet's private sitting room. And the man who came in, hat in hand, sober and quiet, was Mr. Ballard, the man from the lane. He came, as he came every month, to bring the trust's business to its owner. He carried the monthly ledger of the Hudson Meridian Trust, the great New York fund that Josephine's father had built and Josephine now controlled. The fund that had been, all this while, quietly doing exactly what Aunt Harriet had mentioned over the toast weeks ago. Buying up bad paper, buying the county's defaulted debt from Barrington's bank, cheap as an investment, the way her trust bought good things going cheap all over the world. Ballard laid the ledger open on the table, and he turned it so his employer could read it, and he set one careful finger beside a single line. "You should see this one, Miss Calloway," he said. "It came in with the Barrington paper. I thought you would want to know before you signed the month's instructions." Josephine bent over the page, and she read the line, and she went very still. Among the defaulted mortgages the trust was entitled to purchase, at par from Barrington's bank, was one that Ballard's careful finger rested against. A great house in Somerset, near Hartley Combe, 300 years old, mortgaged to the bank years ago against debts the family could no longer pay, and now, this very quarter, fallen into default. 90 days from foreclosure. Due at Michaelmas. The sum was £48,000. The house was Ashdown Hall. Josephine looked at the number and the name for a long time, and neither she nor Aunt Harriet nor Mr. Ballard said a single word. "Do you see it now? Do you see what she was holding and what they had done?" For weeks the family had laughed at the penniless American. For weeks they had planned their rescue over her head, in their code, so sure she could not understand. They meant to marry Aubrey to a fortune before Michaelmas, before the 29th of September, before the debt fell due and the bank took their house. That was the whole desperate game. That was why Cressida, why the ball, why the closed wing and the dry fountain, and the hunt for money, and the debt they were racing to pay. The £48,000 that stood between the Ravensworths and ruin, the rope around the neck of everything they were and everything they owned. Barrington's bank had already sold it cheap. To the Americans, to her. Or it would be hers, if she chose. The trust had the right to buy that mortgage at par. One instruction, one signature, and the defaulted debt of Ashdown Hall would pass out of the bank's hands and into the hands of the grey companion the Countess had just, that very night, ordered to eat with the staff where she belonged. Josephine sat down slowly in the lamplight, with the ledger open before her, and the strange, enormous quiet of it settled over the room. She was not thinking of revenge. I want you to understand that, because it is the whole of who she was. She was her mother's daughter, and Mary had not raised a girl who burned houses. She was not sitting there plotting how to throw the Ravensworths into the road. That was not the thought. The thought was simpler and far stranger. The thought was, I could save it. The house that scorned her. The beautiful, rotting, 300-year-old house, with its orchard where a good man had given her his chair, with its servants who had done her no wrong, with its dry fountain and its closed wing and its screen of golden limes. She could hold that house in the palm of her hand. She could let the bank take it and no one would ever blame her, and the family that had laughed at her would be turned out into the world with nothing. Or she could reach out one gloved hand and hold it up. Either way, from tonight, the great house of Ashdown would belong, body and stone, to the woman they seated below the salt. The question was no longer whether she had been wronged. She had. The question was what kind of woman she was going to be about it. Ballard waited. Aunt Harriet, for once in her life, said nothing at all, and Josephine Calloway drew the ledger toward her and took up the pen and dipped it and held it a moment over the line. Then she drew off her right glove so that her mother's thin gold ring lay bare against her hand. The laundress's ring. And she pressed it, once for a heartbeat, flat against the page, the way you might press a thing for luck, or for a blessing, or for a promise made to someone gone. And in the still lamplight, with no announcement and no witness but her aunt and a quiet man from New York, she signed her name. The house that had mocked her now owed her every stone, and not one soul under its roof had the faintest idea. But somewhere in that great dark house, a golden-haired girl in an emptying fortune was beginning to wonder just what that grey companion carried in the little bag she never ever set down. And she had decided that she was going to find out. The mornings at Ashdown grew colder as September wore on, and the family grew warmer to everyone but her. Josephine watched it happen from her place below the salt. She had a good seat for it, in truth, the seat of a woman no one thinks is listening. And below the salt, she learned, is where the whole house tells you its secrets, because it forgets you are there. Lady Cressida Marlowe came to stay for a fortnight. Then the fortnight became a month. The coal heiress was installed in the yellow bedroom, the good one, the one that still had all its window glass. And the courting of her began in earnest. Viscount Aubrey did the courting the way a man reads a contract. He walked with Cressida in the long gallery. He praised her needlework, which was poor. He praised her singing, which was worse, and every evening at dinner the talk circled back, always, to the same low water. Michaelmas, the 29th of September, the day the debts fell due. "We have until quarter day," Lady Ophelia said one night as the soup went round. "Barrington's has been patient, but patience has a bottom to it, and we are near it." She said this over Josephine's head, quite literally over it. Josephine sat between the Countess and the empty chair where the governess usually sat, and the words passed across her like she was a candlestick. £48,000, Aubrey said. "It might as well be 48 million. We haven't got the one any more than the other. You will have it," his mother said, "when you marry it." And her eyes went, plain as a pointing finger, to the yellow bedroom upstairs. Josephine kept her eyes on her plate. She buttered her bread. She said nothing at all. But under the table, in her lap, her fingers were resting on the little grey reticule she never set down. And inside that reticule, folded once, was the whole of it, the £48,000 they thought they hadn't got. It was 6 inches from the Countess's elbow, in a paper bag on a cord, held by a woman she would not give a chair. Josephine had signed the instruction 3 nights before. Ballard had carried it to London. And somewhere in a marble office off Threadneedle Street, the transfer had gone through, quiet as a key turning. The Hudson Meridian Trust now held the Ashdown mortgage, which meant that Josephine Calloway now held it, which meant that every stone of the house, and the closed wing, and the dry fountain, and the orchard, and the very chair she was not permitted to sit in at the ball, all of it, now, in the eye of the law, belonged to her. And not one soul under that roof knew. That was the strange thing. She thought it would feel like triumph. It did not. It felt like carrying something too hot to hold and too dear to drop. Every dinner she sat below the salt and listened to them fret over their ruin, and she held their salvation in her lap, and she said nothing, and the not saying was the heaviest thing she had ever carried. There was one at the table who did not court money. Captain Edmund Ravensworth had come home lean and sun-dark from his colonial posting, and he had eyes for none of it. Not for Cressida's coal, not for his brother's schemes, only, it seemed, for the plain grey companion no one else would look at. He walked with her in the orchard when the rest of them were at their cards. He asked her questions and then, more rare still, he listened to the answers. "You read the money pages," he said to her once, under the limes. "I've watched you. You read them the way my brother reads a racing form." "A companion must be able to read her employer the newspaper," Josephine said. "Even the dull parts. You don't read them like a companion." He was smiling, but his eyes were steady. "You read them like a woman who understands them. Where did a lady's companion learn to understand a balance sheet?" Her heart did an odd small thing in her chest. Here was the danger. Here was the one man in the house sharp enough to see her, and kind enough not to want anything from her but herself. "My father kept accounts," she said, which was true. "I learned at his knee." "And what did he keep accounts of?" "Small things," she said. "He was a working man." Also true. She simply left out that the working man had worked his way from a railway yard in Albany to a fortune that could buy Somerset entire. Edmund nodded and asked no more, and offered her his arm along the row of trees. And Josephine took it, and was ashamed of the lie, and could not stop herself taking it. He loved her. She knew it the way you know weather coming, and he loved her believing she had nothing, worse than nothing, that she was a paid servant, a woman his own mother had seated with the staff, a landless second son courting a penniless companion. It was the only clean thing in that whole rotten house. Two people with, as everyone believed, exactly nothing to offer each other but themselves. She thought she had never wanted anything so badly, and been so frightened of getting it. Lady Cressida, meanwhile, had begun to watch the reticule. Josephine felt it before she understood it, the coal heiress's blue eyes going, again and again, to the little grey bag on its cord. At breakfast, in the drawing-room, on the stairs, a snooping look, a weighing look. Cressida was broke, though the house did not know it yet. Her family's coal fortune had gone the way of Ashdown's timber, spent and gone, and she had come here to marry a title before her own emptiness showed. She had a pauper's sharp instinct for another pauper's secrets, and she had decided that the grey companion's refusal ever to set down that bag meant something worth knowing. The near thing came on a wet Thursday. Josephine had left the reticule for one moment, one careless moment, on the seat of a chair in the morning-room while she crossed to the window to draw the curtain against the rain. When she turned back, Cressida had it in her hands. "What a shabby little thing," Cressida said, turning it over. Her voice was light and cruel. "You do guard it so. One wonders what a woman like you could have that's worth the guarding." "It's nothing," Josephine said, and her own voice came out steady, though her blood had gone to ice. "A companion's oddments." "Give it back, if you please." Oddments? Cressida had already worked the clasp. "Let us see your oddments, Miss Marsh." And she drew out the paper. The folded New York bank draft. She unfolded it there in the grey, rainy light, and Josephine stood 6 feet away and could not move, and watched her whole disguise come apart in another woman's hands. Cressida read it, her painted brows drew together. And then, and this was the thing Josephine would remember all her life, the thin blade's edge she stood on, Cressida laughed. "Oh," she said. "Oh, this is rich." Because Lady Cressida Marlowe, who had never in her life seen an American draft, who could not read the crossed hand of a New York clearing bank, who had already decided in her own mind exactly who and what this companion was, Lady Cressida saw a large number and a foreign bank's name, and drew the only conclusion her contempt allowed her. "A forgery," she said, delighted. "You carry a forged fortune, a paper you'll never cash in 100 years. Is this how you comfort yourself, Miss Marsh, playing at riches in a shabby bag?" She flung it down on the chair. You poor, pretending creature. Wait until I tell them, and tell them she did. At dinner that very night she told the whole table, laughing, that the grey companion carried a make-believe fortune in her bag, a forged draft, a pauper's daydream on paper. The family laughed with her. Lady Ophelia's mouth curled. Aubrey called it the most pathetic thing he had heard all season. Only Edmund did not laugh. He looked at Josephine down the length of the table, and there was something in his face that was not scorn at all, but a kind of quiet trouble, as though a piece of a puzzle had turned in his hand and not quite fit. And Josephine sat below the salt and let them laugh. Because a truth called a lie is the safest truth in the world. Cressida had held £48,000 in her own 2 hands, and had handed it back, and had never known. The real thing, mocked as a false thing, was safer now than it had ever been. She had spent nothing. The house still did not know. The payoff was still whole. She pressed her right wrist under the table, where her mother's ring lay on its ribbon. And she waited. The waiting ended 9 days before Michaelmas. It ended with a letter, Barrington's Bank, on its heavy cream paper, addressed to the Countess of Ashdown. Lady Ophelia read it at the breakfast table, and the colour left her face like water leaving a glass. "They've sold it," she said. Aubrey looked up. "Sold what?" "The mortgage. Our mortgage." Her hand was shaking, just slightly, and she was a woman whose hands never shook. "Barrington's has assigned the debt. It has been bought. By," she looked again at the letter, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something bearable, "by a New York trust. An American concern. The Hudson Meridian Trust." She said the name like something foul. "They hold our paper now. Every penny of it. And they will not treat." "What do you mean, will not treat?" "I mean I have written already this week, before this came, to Barrington's to beg more time, and this is the answer. The holder declines to extend. The holder declines to renegotiate. The holder requires payment in full at Michaelmas, or forecloses on the quarter day." She set the letter down very carefully, as if it might break. 9 days. We have 9 days, and we are dealing no longer with a Somerset bank we have known for 40 years, but with strangers across an ocean who will not so much as take our call. Josephine buttered her bread. She had told Ballard that is what she had done. She had told him, refuse them. When the family writes to beg, refuse, but gently, in the ordinary language of business, so it draws no eye to me. Let them feel the walls close. Not to torment them. She told herself it was not to torment them, and mostly she believed it. It was so that when the truth came, it would come all at once, and clean and undeniable, in front of the same faces that had laughed, so that no one could pretend afterward it had not happened, so that the house would know exactly whose mercy it lived on. "There must be someone we can reach," Aubrey was saying. "Some agent, some man in England who acts for them." "There is," said Lady Ophelia. "The letter names him, a Mr. Ballard, of London." She frowned. "The name is oddly familiar." Josephine kept her eyes on her plate. Of course it was familiar. Cressida had seen the man twice from the drawing-room window, watching the house from the lane, and had said so aloud, and no one had thought a thing of it. A stranger in the lane. What was that to them? "Send for him," the Countess said. "Send for this Ballard. And send for Fenwick. I want our own solicitor in the room. If we are to lose Ashdown, I will lose it with my own man beside me. We will hold a council. Here, in the drawing-room. We will make them see reason, if they have any. And if they haven't?" Lady Ophelia rose from the table, and for a moment she was very old, older than her 58 years, a widow standing in the ruin of 300 years of blood. "Then we lose the house that our family held before there was a Bank of England," she said. "And I will have to learn, at my age, what it is to be nobody at all." She left the room, and Josephine, below the salt, felt no triumph, only the strange, sad, steady weight of what she was about to do. That night, Edmund found her in the orchard. The moon was up over the screen of limes, and the dry fountain threw its broken shadow across the grass, and he came to her fast, like a man who has been arguing with himself and lost. Josephine, he never called her Miss Marsh. I have to say a thing to you, and I have to say it tonight, because after tonight I may not be able to. You know what's happened. You've seen it. The house is going. My family is ruined, and I have less than nothing. I am a second son of a broken estate. I have my pay and my name, and not 1 acre to put a wife on. Edmund, let me finish, or I'll never get through it. He took her hands, both of them grey-gloved in his brown ones. I have watched them treat you like furniture in this house. I have watched my own mother shame you before 40 people, and every day I have thought, that woman is worth more than the whole pack of us with our names and our nothing. I have nothing to offer you, Josephine, nothing but a landless man and a whole heart. But I am asking, will you marry me? Not to save anyone, not to gain a thing. There's nothing to gain. Only because I can't watch you leave this place and go back to being alone, and no, I never said it. The moon was very bright, and Josephine Calloway, heiress of the Calloway and Western Railroad, who could have bought and sold every Ravensworth 10 times over, stood in a borrowed grey dress before a penniless captain who thought he was offering charity, and understood that she was hearing the only proposal of her life made to the woman, and not the money. He did not know. That was the whole of it. He was choosing Miss Marsh, the companion with a forged draft and a shabby bag, the woman his mother seated below the salt. He was choosing nothing, and calling it everything, and he had never once in the courting counted a penny. She thought of New York, of the man who had courted her there, and the letters found afterward pricing her trust to the shilling, of how she had come across an ocean in a plain grey dress to find out if there was one soul on earth who would be kind to a woman worth nothing. She had found him. He was standing in front of her in the moonlight, ashamed of his empty pockets. "Yes," she said. His face broke open. "Yes?" "Yes, before you can know one thing more about me than you know tonight." "Yes." Her eyes were wet, and she let them be. "Remember that I said it now, Edmund, when you were sure I had nothing, and you asked me anyway. Remember it was tonight." He didn't understand the words, but he kissed her under the limes, and she let him, and for one moment there was no draft, and no mortgage, and no Michaelmas, and no disguise. Only a laundress's daughter and an honest man, with nothing between them but the truth she had not yet told. The next morning she sent for Ballard and told him to bring Fenwick the deed, and she went upstairs and she took the grey dress off for the last time. The crisis council was set for the drawing-room. 40 of them came, the same 40, near enough, who had sat at the county ball and watched the Countess refuse the companion her chair. Word of the Ashdown ruin had spread the way such words do, and the county gathered under the cover of concern to watch a great family fall. They filled the drawing-room. The same faces. Mr. Fenwick, the family solicitor, sat at the head of the long table with his papers. Lady Ophelia sat rigid beside him. Aubrey stood at the mantel. Cressida had a chair near the front, close to Aubrey, holding her position to the last, and Edmund stood apart by the window, pale, not knowing why his blood had been cold since the moment he woke. Ballard was shown in. A quiet man in a plain dark coat, a leather case under his arm. The room looked at him as at a hangman. "You act for the holder," Fenwick said. "For this? Hudson Meridian Trust." "I act for the holder," Ballard agreed. "Then you may tell the holder," Lady Ophelia said, and her voice was steel over ice, "that this family has held Ashdown for 300 years, and that we will meet any reasonable." "Madam." Ballard's voice was mild, and it stopped her cold because no one interrupted the Countess of Ashdown. I am instructed that the holder wishes to speak for herself. She is here. If the room will permit, I will ask that she be sent for. Herself, Aubrey repeated. The holder is here? A woman? She has been here, Ballard said, some time. And the door opened. Josephine came in, not in grey, in deep travelling blue, well cut, well made, a lady's dress and a rich one, and her dark hair dressed plain and fine, and her chin up, and her hands ungloved. She wore no jewel but one. On her right hand, bare for all of them to see, a thin worn gold band. A laundress's wedding ring on the hand of the woman who owned their house. The room did not understand. Not at first. Some of them half rose out of courtesy to a lady they did not know, and then, one by one, the faces changed as they placed her. The grey companion. The furniture. The woman below the salt. Cressida made a sound. That is the companion, Lady Ophelia said. Her voice had gone strange. That is Miss Marsh. That is one of my names, Josephine said. She came to the foot of the long table and stood where they had never once let her sit. Miss Josephine Marsh. It was my mother's name before she married. I have used it these 3 months, madam, because I wished to see England as a woman worth nothing sees it. I have seen it very clearly. She let that rest a moment. You may know me better by my other name. Fenwick had opened his leather case. His hands, Josephine saw, were not quite steady. Layer by layer, then, she said, so that no one in this room can say afterward they misheard. She reached into the little grey reticule, the shabby bag, the one she still carried, and she drew out the folded paper Cressida had held and laughed at and flung down. She unfolded it and laid it flat on the table before them all. Firstly, Josephine said, this draft is not a forgery. Lady Cressida, you held it in your own hands and called it a pauper's daydream. Mr. Fenwick, you are a solicitor. Read it and tell the room what it is. Fenwick took it up. He read it. And the colour that came into his face told the room the answer before his mouth did. It is genuine, he said, low. It is a clearing draft on a New York bank. It is. Good God, it is drawn for a very great sum. It is entirely, unimpeachably genuine. Cressida had gone the colour of tallow. She stared at the paper she had thrown down. Her mouth worked. All her season's calculation, all her sneering certainty that she was the only true fortune in the room, and this creature the only true pauper, collapsed in her face in the space of a breath. She had held the truth and called it a lie, and now 40 people had watched her be wrong. That is the first thing, Josephine said. I am not penniless. I never was. Aubrey pushed off from the mantel. Then who, he demanded, in the devil's name, are you? That is the second thing. Josephine looked at him. My father was a working man from a railway yard in Albany, New York. He married my mother when she was a laundress, and he never once, in all his riches, denied that she had scrubbed other people's linen for her bread. His name was Calloway. He built the Calloway and Western Railroad out of nothing but his own 2 hands and his own hard head, and when he died he left it to his only child, to me. She let the room have it. I am Josephine Calloway. The Calloway fortune is mine. I am, Viscount, the American coin your mother spoke of at the ball, the coin she said I plainly hadn't got. I had rather more of it than she imagined. Aubrey's mouth opened and shut. He had spent a whole season courting Cressida's dead coal to save the estate, and had sneered daily at a companion who could have bought his family entire, and never felt the loss. The contempt of a lifetime turned, in front of him, into the largest error of his life. He looked at Cressida, and Cressida looked at the floor, and the two of them understood in the same instant that they had each been chasing the other's emptiness while the whole world's fortune sat below the salt. That is the second thing, said Josephine. Now the third. Mr. Fenwick, she nodded to the solicitor, you have before you the assignment of the Ashdown mortgage. Barrington's Bank sold that paper to the Hudson Meridian Trust of New York. Read to the room, if you please, in whose name that trust holds every stone of this house. Fenwick drew out the deed, the assigned mortgage, £48,000, 90 days from foreclosure. He unfolded it on the table beside the draft. He found the line. And in the total silence of that drawing-room, with 40 of the county leaning in to hear, he read it aloud. The Hudson Meridian Trust, Fenwick said, of the City of New York. Sole beneficiary and principal. He stopped. He looked up, once, at the woman in blue. Then he read the name. Miss Josephine Calloway. The word went through the room like cold water. She holds it, Fenwick said, because someone had to say the plain thing plainly. The mortgage on Ashdown Hall is held, entire, by this lady. She is the New York Trust. She is the holder who would not treat. Since, he checked the date, and his voice dropped, since the very night of the county ball. She has held the debt of this house since the evening she was refused a chair at its table. And then, at last, they all turned to Lady Ophelia. The Countess had not moved. She sat very straight at the head of her own table, in the drawing-room where she had ruled for 30 years. And she looked at the grey companion who was not grey and was not a companion, and she understood, fully, finally to the bottom, what she had done. She had seated her fate below the salt. She had refused a chair to the one hand in England that held her house. She had stood before 40 people and said this woman could not purchase her place with American coin, and the American coin had already, that very night, bought the ground beneath the Countess's feet. Lady Ophelia's face did not crumple. Josephine gave her that. The woman had iron in her, whatever else. But something went out of it, some 300-year certainty, some blood-deep sureness that place is a thing you are born to and cannot be taken by anyone born lower. It drained out of the old face and left it only human, only a frightened old woman in a failing house, at the mercy of a laundress's daughter she had chosen, of all people, to despise. "You," Lady Ophelia said. It was barely a word. "Me," Josephine agreed. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the room someone let out a breath. Cressida had begun, quietly and without dignity, to cry, not from grief for Ashdown, but from the ruin of her own last scheme. The coal heiress fraud undone in the same hour, for the county had heard now that she'd called a true fortune false, and clever people would work the rest out by morning. Aubrey stood grey, and still, his marriage of convenience turned to ash, his contempt for trade lying broken at the feet of what trade had become. And by the window, Edmund had not moved at all. Josephine looked at him last, and it cost her the most. But first there was the house. First there were the terms. She turned back to the table where they had never let her sit, and she put her ungloved hand flat upon the deed, the thin gold ring bright against the paper. "You are waiting," she said to the room, "to hear what I mean to do. You have decided already, most of you, that I mean to turn this family out. It would be just. No one on earth would blame me. Lady Ophelia herself would have done it, in my place, and called it good business." She saw the Countess flinch, because it was true. But I did not buy this debt to break this house. She looked around the drawing-room, at the beautiful cracked ceiling, at the good frightened servants standing along the wall who had never once done her a wrong, at the tall windows, and beyond them the orchard and the screen of golden limes. "I hold your mortgage," Josephine said, "and I will go on holding it, at fair interest, a fair rate any honest bank would give, and the family will keep Ashdown Hall. You will not be turned out, not one stone of you." A stir went round the room, disbelief more than relief. "Understand me, this is no gift to the Ravensworth name. The Ravensworth name has earned nothing from me but the memory of a cold ballroom. It is a gift to the house, which is 300 years old and did me no harm. To the servants, who carried my trays and were kind to me when their masters were not, and to an orchard where a man once gave me his own chair when a countess would not. Her voice did not shake, but it went quiet. The house lives, because it deserves to. You may thank the stones, madam, not me. Lady Ophelia rose. It cost her everything. Josephine watched it cost her, to rise in her own drawing-room before her own guests and receive mercy from the woman she had seated with the staff. The old countess stood, and she was pale, and her voice when it came was a thread of its old steel. "You are generous," she said. It was plainly the hardest word of her life. "No," said Josephine, and here she gave back, at last, the thing she had carried since the ballroom passage, since the night she pressed her mother's ring to her wrist alone in the dark. She said it gently. She said it without heat, which was the only way it could have been said. "You told me, madam, at the ball before 40 people, one does not purchase one's place in England. You were right. I have not purchased yours. I would not have it. I have only paid your debts. The being born to it, I leave entirely to you." One line. She said no more. She did not need to. Lady Ophelia sat down slowly and did not answer. And in the not answering the whole long war between blood and merit was decided, quietly, in a drawing-room in Somerset, in favour of the laundress's girl. Then Josephine went to the window, to Edmund, and the rest of the room she let fall away. He was ashen. She had known he would be. She saw the thought moving behind his eyes, the terrible one, and she caught it before it could root. "You're thinking," she said, low, for him alone, "that this is New York turned inside out. That there you were jilted by a man who wanted your fortune, and here you have got one, a woman with a fortune, who let you propose to a pauper and made a fool of your honest heart. You're thinking your proposal looks now like a beggar's luck, that you asked for nothing and got everything, and that everyone in this room will believe you knew." His jaw was tight. "Didn't I?" No, she reached into the reticule one last time. She drew out a single folded sheet, and she put it in his hand. "Read the date." He unfolded it. It was Ballard's letter of instruction, in her own hand, ordering the acquisition confirmed, the deed drawn. The disguise ended, and at the top the date, the morning after the orchard. The morning after he had taken both her grey-gloved hands under the limes and asked a penniless companion to marry a landless man. "You asked me when I had nothing," she said. "When you were certain I had nothing. You are the only man in England, Edmund, who chose me over an empty bag. Every other soul in this room courted a fortune or fled a pauper. You alone walked into that orchard and asked for the woman and left the money out of it entirely, because you thought there was no money." Her voice went thick. "Your name is the only thing in this whole drawing-room that was freely given. It's worth more to me than every mile of the Callaway and Western. Don't you dare be ashamed of it." Edmund looked at the date. He looked at the woman, and whatever had been cold in him since morning went warm all at once, and he laughed, a broken, relieved, wondering sound, and he did not care that 40 people watched him do it. "You might have told me," he said. "I'm telling you now," said Josephine Callaway. "Will you still have me? I come with rather more baggage than I let on." "God help me," said Edmund. Yes, 6 months later the light came honey gold through the screen of limes, the way it does in a Somerset spring near evening, and the orchard was kept, and the servants were kept, and the dry fountain ran again, because a woman who owns a house can afford to mend a pump. Josephine walked the rows with her husband. She wore no grey now, she wore her own good clothes, and on her hand, plain for anyone to see, her mother's thin-worn wedding band, the laundress's ring, on the hand of the heiress who held the estate. She had stopped hiding it under a glove. She wore it at the head of tables now. Aunt Harriet sat on the mended garden bench with the London papers, reading the city columns aloud and laughing at them, because she had money in half the concerns she read about, and it pleased her to hear them do well. Aubrey had gone abroad. Cressida had gone quieter still, back to whatever was left of the coal, her season's game over. And Lady Ophelia had sent, only the week before, a stiff and perfectly correct little card inviting Captain and Mrs. Ravensworth to dine at Ashdown. At the table this time. A chair, the card had specified, in its cramped proud hand, at the head. Josephine meant to go. She bore the old woman no grudge worth keeping. There is a kind of victory that turns sour if you gnaw on it, and she had no taste for sour. She would sit at the head of the table where they had once seated her below the salt, and she would be gracious, because she could afford to be, in every way there is. Edmund picked her a green apple, too early, hard and sharp, and she ate it anyway because he'd picked it. "Do you know what your mother would say," he asked, "if she could see the laundress's ring at the head of the Ashdown table?" Josephine thought about it. The evening light lay gold across the grass, over the row of limes, over 300 years of stone that owed her everything and had learned, at last, to be grateful for it. "She'd say a place isn't a thing you're born to," Josephine said. "It's a thing you earn. And then, if you've any decency left in you, it's a thing you make room at the table to share." She took his arm the way she had that first day under the trees, when he'd thought she had nothing and loved her anyway, and they walked back toward the house that had scorned her, and was hers in the last of the honey light. Some people are born to their place. A few earn one instead, and the rarest of them, having earned it, are gracious enough to pull out a chair. If this story reached you tonight, comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far it travels.